I was still in the hospital bed, holding our daughter for the first time, when my husband leaned down and whispered that he needed a DNA test before he could fully bond with her. I had just been through 19 hours of labor. I hadn't slept. I was shaking. And the man who had promised to love me through everything was standing there looking at our 2-hour-old baby like she was evidence in a case against me. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I just looked at him and said, "Okay." Because in that moment, something very quiet and very permanent broke inside me. Not my heart, my patience, my willingness to keep pretending, and the version of me that would have begged him to take it back. She was gone before he even finished his sentence. What he didn't know, what he had no idea about, was that while he was busy doubting the child I had just pushed into the world, I had already spent 3 months quietly learning the truth about him. And what I found made his little DNA test look like a parking ticket, sitting next to a federal indictment. 5 days after our daughter was born, police knocked on our front door. I was home with the baby. He was not. He never came back to that house as a free man. This is the story of how I went from being the woman he doubted in a hospital bed to the woman who handed investigators exactly what they needed. Before I go any further, I need to ask you something. If the person who was supposed to protect you stood in the room where you were most vulnerable and made you feel like a suspect, would you have stayed quiet? Would you have kept the peace? Or would that be the moment something finally changed in you? Drop your answer in the comments. Because the way I handled what came next is going to depend on you understanding exactly what kind of woman I was before all of this, and the kind I became after. My name is not important. What is important is that for 6 years, I was the kind of wife people look at and think, she really loves him. And I did. I loved Marcus the way some people love a place completely, instinctively, without needing a reason. He was charming and confident, and he made everything feel like a plan was in motion. Early on, that felt safe. Later, I would understand that a man always running a plan is not the same as a man who loves you. We met at a mutual friend's birthday dinner. I was 31, he was 35. He had his own small construction contracting company, a close family, and a laugh that filled every room he walked into. I was a licensed accountant working at a mid-size firm. I was good at my job, methodical, careful, always reading the numbers twice. My friends used to joke that I would audit my own wedding. I should have taken that more seriously. We dated for 2 years. He proposed on a Sunday morning in our apartment kitchen, while I was making coffee. No ceremony, just a ring placed quietly beside my mug, and those eyes looking at me like I was the answer to a question he'd been carrying a long time. I said yes before I even picked the ring up. That was the version of me that still believed in the simple version of things. We married in a small ceremony. His family was warm on the surface, his mother Diane, his brother Trevor, his sister-in-law Corrine. They folded me in with smiles and holiday invitations and careful compliments. I told myself I had a family now. What I didn't see yet was that I had entered a system, not a family. And that system had rules I hadn't been told about. The first 2 years of marriage were genuinely good. Marcus was attentive, we traveled, we talked about the future with the easy confidence of people who haven't been tested yet. I kept working, I kept saving. I was always the financial brain between us. Marcus was smart with contracts and clients, but personal money made him vague. He'd wave off budget conversations with "you handle it, you're the expert," and for a long time I thought that was trust. I got pregnant with our daughter Nora in our 4th year of marriage. It was planned, wanted, celebrated, or so I believed. Marcus seemed happy at first. He told his family, he set up a nursery, he came to appointments. But somewhere in the 5th month, something shifted. He started coming home later. He started sleeping on the couch, claiming the pregnancy smell made him nauseous, which sounds absurd because it is absurd. He started having phone calls he took in the garage. I noticed, I always notice. But I told myself the story every loyal spouse tells themselves. He's stressed, work is hard, this is a big life change, give him space. I kept cooking dinner and attending birthing classes alone and telling my best friend Lena that everything was fine. Lena had known me since college. She didn't believe me, but she waited. By the 7th month, Marcus had essentially become a roommate who paid part of the bills and occasionally remembered I was pregnant. His mother Diane called once a week to check on the nursery progress and once to ask if I was managing my stress, because apparently stress was something I was doing wrong. I should have said something then. Instead, I thanked her for calling. The thing that started the real unraveling wasn't dramatic. It was a bank notification on a Tuesday afternoon in my 8th month of pregnancy. I was sitting at the kitchen table, working remotely, and my phone buzzed with an alert from the joint savings account Marcus, and I had set up specifically for Nora the baby account, we called it. We'd been depositing into it every month for 2 years. The alert said the balance had dropped from $41,000 to $6,000 in a single transfer. I sat very still for a moment. Then I picked up my phone and looked at the account history. $35,000 had been transferred to an account I did not recognize 3 days earlier. The description said only, TRC Holdings. I called Marcus immediately. He answered on the third ring and told me not to worry, it was a short-term business investment. He'd explain later, the money would be back with interest. His voice had that smooth, rehearsed quality it got when he was managing me rather than talking to me. I said okay. I hung up. And I opened my laptop and started searching for TRC Holdings. There was no legitimate business by that name registered in our state. There was a shell company filing 2 states away that had been created 8 months ago, and one of the registered agents listed was Marcus's brother, Trevor. I want to pause here and explain something about who I was at this point, because it matters for everything that follows. I was not a woman who jumped to conclusions. I was the woman who made spreadsheets before making decisions. I was the woman who ran 3 different tax scenarios before filing each year. I was the woman who had found embezzlement at my firm 3 years earlier by noticing a $200 discrepancy in a quarterly report. I knew what patterns looked like. I knew the difference between a mistake and a design. What I was looking at was a design. I did not confront Marcus that night. I did not ask about Trevor. I went to bed, stared at the ceiling, and made a list in my head of everything I needed to check. Because here is the thing about evidence, if you reveal too early that you know, the evidence disappears. Documents get destroyed. Accounts get closed. Stories get aligned. I had seen it happen at work. I was not going to let it happen to me. The next morning I called Lena. Not to cry, to think out loud. She listened for 20 minutes without interrupting, which is one of the reasons she is my best friend. Then she said, "Do you need a lawyer or do you need a CPA?" I said I needed both, but I needed to go slow. She said, "I know someone." She always knows someone. Over the next 6 weeks, the final 6 weeks of my pregnancy, I built a file. It started with TRC Holdings. Using business registry databases I accessed through my firm's professional subscriptions, I found that TRC Holdings had received deposits from 4 different sources in the past 8 months. One of those sources was a subcontractor payment account connected to Marcus's construction company. Another was a personal transfer from a name I didn't recognize. The third was from a real estate holding company. The fourth was our baby savings account. Then I pulled Marcus's business financials. He had given me access years ago when I helped him set up QuickBooks, and he had never taken that access away. The password still worked. In 3 hours of quiet evening work while Marcus watched television in the other room, I found that he had been running invoice double billing on at least 6 client projects over the past 2 years. He'd submit an invoice to the client for materials and labor, collect payment, and then submit a near-identical invoice to a secondary account before the original payment cleared. Most clients never caught it. The amounts ranged from $4,000 to $22,000 per project. The total I could document was just under $190,000. I printed nothing. I photographed nothing. I created a secure cloud folder under an email address Marcus did not know existed, and I uploaded every screenshot, every export, every filing reference. Then I called the attorney Lena had recommended. Her name was Patricia. She was a family law attorney who had previously worked in financial litigation. When I walked into her office at 8 months pregnant with a folder of organized evidence, she looked at me over her glasses and said, "You've done this before." I said, "I've never had to do this before." She said, "That makes it more impressive." Nora was born on a Thursday evening after a long, difficult labor. Marcus was in the room. He held my hand through contractions and told me I was doing great, and in those hours I let myself believe that maybe I had read everything wrong. Maybe the money had a real explanation, maybe. The man who was watching our daughter come into the world would be the man I had married. She arrived at 7:42 p.m. 6 pounds, 11 ounces. She had my nose and his ears and the most serious expression I have ever seen on a brand new human being. I held her against my chest, and for about 90 minutes, the world contracted to just the two of us. Marcus held her briefly. He smiled for the photos. Then he stepped into the hallway to make calls, which I told myself was just new father nervousness. It was close to 10 p.m. when he came back in, sat down, and said the thing that ended everything. He said he loved me and he loved the baby, but because of some things he had heard, he thought it would be better for everyone if they did a DNA test before he put his name on the birth certificate. He said it carefully. He said it like he had practiced it. He said he wasn't accusing me of anything, just protecting himself. I was holding our daughter. I had been awake for 22 hours. I had 17 stitches, and my husband was telling me he wasn't sure he was the father. I said okay. Not because I was weak. Not because I was too exhausted to fight. I said okay because I was 3 months deep into evidence collection and I needed him calm and confident and completely unaware that anything was coming. If I exploded, he might panic. He might call Trevor. He might start moving money. He might destroy the very records I needed. So I said okay, and I watched his shoulders drop with relief, and I thought, you have no idea. His mother Diane visited the next day. She brought a gift bag with organic baby soap and a card. She cooed over Nora and then, while I was nursing, she sat on the edge of the hospital chair and said she thought Marcus had been very mature and responsible to request the test, that it was important for men to be certain, that she hoped I understood it wasn't personal. I looked at her holding my daughter's tiny hand and I felt something clarify inside me. Not anger, something colder. The understanding that this woman had known, that this was a family conversation that had happened before Marcus walked into my room, that the request had been encouraged, possibly scripted. I thanked her for the soap. I asked the nurse to let me rest. Marcus arranged the DNA test through a private lab. Standard paternity test, cheek swab, results in 5 to 7 business days. He seemed almost cheerful about it, which told me everything I needed to know about how confident he was in what he expected to find. Whatever story he had built in his head, whatever lie someone had told him, he believed it completely. What he didn't know was that the night after he left the hospital to go home and sleep, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to Patricia, my attorney. I told her the timeline had moved up and I needed her to file for legal separation and asset freeze within the next 72 hours. She asked if I was certain. I said I had never been more certain of anything in my life. She said she would begin drafting immediately. The second call was to a contact she had given me 3 weeks earlier, a forensic accountant named Robert who had worked with state financial investigators for 11 years before going private. I had already shared my evidence folder with him. He had already been reviewing it. When I called, he picked up immediately and said, "I was hoping you'd give me the green light." I gave him the green light. I came home from the hospital on Saturday. Marcus carried the car seat inside. He had tidied the house, there were flowers on the counter, and for 2 days he was helpful and present in a way that felt like a performance of a husband rather than an actual husband. I accepted the performance. I fed Nora, I slept in small windows, I nursed my body back together, and I waited. On Monday morning, Marcus went to work as normal. The moment his car left the driveway, I opened my laptop. Patricia had filed. The petition for legal separation citing financial misconduct was now on record. The asset freeze request had been submitted. This meant that once a judge reviewed and approved, which Patricia said could happen within days given the documentation, neither Marcus nor anyone associated with his accounts could transfer or liquidate assets without triggering a court violation. Robert had filed his preliminary findings with the State Financial Crimes Unit the previous Friday. He had found what I found, plus more. The double billing scheme was more extensive than my records showed. Marcus had also been falsifying material cost receipts and pocketing the difference from client escrow accounts. There was a paper trail connecting TRC Holdings to at least 3 shell transactions, and Trevor's name appeared in the financial filings of 2 of them. Robert told me quietly, "This isn't a domestic matter anymore, this is fraud, multiple counts." The DNA results came in on Wednesday, 5 days after Nora was born. Mart! Cuss called me from work, voice tight, to tell me that the results confirmed he was the father. He said it in this strange, deflated way, like a man who had been so certain he was right that being wrong felt like its own kind of loss. He said he was sorry for doubting me. He said he hoped we could move forward. I said, I know you're her father, Marcus. I always knew. There was a long silence. He started to say something about coming home early so we could talk, that we had a lot to work through, that he wanted to make things right. And I said, gently, without any trace of victory in my voice, I think you should be aware that Patricia Morrison filed paperwork on my behalf on Monday. You may have already been served, and I think you should talk to a lawyer before you come home. Another silence, longer this time. He said, what? I said, I have to feed the baby. Take care of yourself, Marcus. I hung up. I found out later, through Patricia and then through public record, what happened in the next 48 hours. Marcus called Trevor immediately after hanging up with me. Trevor told him not to panic, that the paperwork was probably just a standard legal separation filing, that they could handle it, that the accounts were clean enough. What Trevor didn't know was that Robert's referral to the State Financial Crimes Unit had already been escalated. The investigators had been building on Robert's foundation with their own warrants and their own account subpoenas for several days. Marcus's call to Trevor was made from a phone that was already on a record hold. On Thursday morning, 2 state financial crimes investigators and 1 federal postal inspector, because some of the client invoice fraud had crossed state lines through mail and electronic transfer, arrived at Marcus's work site. They were professional and quiet. They asked him to come with them for questioning. At the same time, 2 other investigators arrived at Trevor's office. I was home with Nora when Patricia called to tell me. She said it very matter-of-factly, the way she said most things. She said the asset freeze had been granted that morning, which meant the accounts were locked. She said I should expect media attention if charges were formally filed. She said I had done everything correctly. I was sitting in the nursing chair by the window. Nora was asleep on my chest. Outside, the neighbors' sprinklers were going. The street was completely ordinary. I said, thank you, Patricia. She said, thank yourself. I've had clients with far more resources do far less with what you had. I want to stop here and be honest about something, because I think it matters. I did not feel triumphant that morning. I did not feel victorious or righteous or any of the dramatic emotions you might expect. What I felt was tired. Deeply, permanently tired. The kind of tired that lives in your chest, not your body. Because the thing about this kind of betrayal, not just the fraud, not just the DNA request, but the specific combination of being doubted and used at the same time, is that it doesn't leave you angry. It leaves you hollow in the shape of the trust you used to carry. I had loved Marcus. That part was real. And there is a specific grief in loving someone who turns out to have been running calculations behind your eyes the entire time. You don't just lose the person. You lose every memory that now has a different meaning. Every kind gesture becomes suspect. Every conversation replays with a hidden subtext you didn't know to listen for. Lena came over that afternoon. She brought food and said almost nothing, which is exactly what I needed. She sat on the couch and held Nora while I ate something real for the first time in days, and she didn't ask me how I was feeling because she knew I didn't have an answer yet. What I had, instead of feelings, was a plan. I had always been better at plans than feelings, and the plan was still in motion. Marcus was not arrested that Thursday. He was questioned and released while investigators continued building their case. But the asset freeze held. His business accounts, the joint accounts, the TRC Holdings accounts, all of it frozen. He had access to whatever personal cash he had on hand and nothing else. He came to the house that evening. He rang the doorbell, which he had never done before in the years we had lived there. I looked at him through the door camera app on my phone from the nursery where I was sitting with Nora, and I made a choice not to answer. He stood on the porch for a while. He texted me 8 times. The texts ranged from apologetic to pleading to, around the 6th one, slightly accusatory, suggesting I had overreacted and gone nuclear over a misunderstanding. I saved every text message and forwarded them to Patricia. His mother Diane called me the next morning. Her voice had a new texture in it, thinner, more careful. She said she thought perhaps I had acted hastily. That family's work tea. Rough hard times. That Nora needed her father. I let her finish. Then I said, Diane, I need you to understand something. Marcus asked for a DNA test on a baby I had just delivered after 19 hours of labor because someone in your family told him a lie. And while I was being accused of infidelity, your son and your other son were committing financial crimes that could send them both to prison. I did not create this situation. I just stopped pretending it wasn't happening. She was silent for a long time. Then she said, I didn't know about the money. I said, I believe you, and I meant it, but I also said, that doesn't change what needs to happen now. The question of who told Marcus I had been unfaithful, which was the lie that led to the DNA test, took about 2 weeks to fully surface. It came out not through any dramatic confrontation, but through a text message that Marcus's phone records eventually revealed during the legal discovery process. The message had been sent to Marcus by Corrine, Trevor's wife. She had sent it 7 weeks before Nora was born. She claimed she had seen me with another man at a coffee shop in a context that looked inappropriate. She said she hadn't wanted to say anything, but felt he deserved to know. She said she was only telling him because she cared about the family. What Corrine had actually seen was me with Robert, the forensic accountant I had not yet hired, but was meeting for the first time at the recommendation of Lena's attorney contact. We had met at a public coffee shop for 40 minutes to discuss whether he could assist with a preliminary review of some financial records I was concerned about. That was the meeting. That was the entire meeting. Corrine had seen a woman she was already watching, because she and Trevor were worried I would find what I eventually found, having a professional meeting with a man, and had either genuinely misread it or deliberately twisted it to create a distraction. Either way, she handed Marcus a story he wanted to believe, and he built his entire doubt on that single text. I will let you draw your own conclusions about whether that was a coincidence. The formal charges came 6 weeks later. Marcus was charged with wire fraud, contractor fraud, and misappropriation of client funds. Trevor was charged as a co-conspirator in the shell company scheme. The federal postal inspector charge added an additional layer that complicated their ability to settle quietly at the state level. Marcus's attorney reached out to Patricia immediately and began making offers. First, they wanted me to withdraw the financial misconduct claims in the separation proceeding, framing it as not in Nora's interest for her father to face these circumstances. Patricia replied in writing with 2 words, declined. Then they tried through Diane, who called me again and asked, more quietly now, more carefully, whether there was any arrangement that might be made. She said Marcus was willing to make things right financially. I told Diane I appreciated her calling and that my attorney would be the appropriate contact for any proposals. I told her I wasn't interested in arrangements. I was interested in a fair legal resolution. She started crying softly and said she didn't know how things had gotten this far. I said, with genuine sadness rather than cruelty, they got this far because the people in your family were very good at making sure I never knew what was happening until I was too far in to easily get out. I know that wasn't you, Diane, but I also know I can't undo it for you. We never spoke again after that. The divorce proceedings ran parallel to the criminal case and were complicated by the frozen assets. What became clear during discovery was that the marital estate was significantly different from what I had believed. The $41,000 in the baby account had been diverted, yes, but there was also approximately $280,000 in business equity that Marcus had been systematically underreporting to keep it out of any potential marital division calculation. Patricia found it through the same business records I had initially accessed. Marcus had been planning to eventually leave. Not in the immediate term, maybe, but at some point. The financial structure he had built, the shell company with Trevor, the underreported equity, the skimmed client funds, was designed to give him a hidden pool of assets that would look clean on paper if a divorce ever happened. I had been working, saving, contributing to a household whose financial reality was being quietly hollowed out from beneath me. My own savings, which I had maintained in accounts entirely separate from our joint finances, a habit I had kept since before marriage because I simply believed in financial independence, were clean. Roughly $87,000 in personal savings, my $401K, my professional income. none of it touched by what Marcus had done. Which meant I was not financially ruined. I was financially intact, plus whatever I was entitled to from the marital estate once the courts finished sorting through the wreckage of what Marcus had built. Patricia was confident. The forensic trail was clear. The hardest part of that period was not the legal proceedings. The hardest part was being a new mother alone. Nora was 3 weeks old when I stopped having a functioning marriage, and 8 weeks old when the legal proceedings fully accelerated. There were nights when she cried for 2 hours, and I sat on the floor of her nursery, not because I was at the end of my strength, but because sitting felt like the most honest response to the moment. I was on the floor. The world was on the floor. We could be on the floor together. Lena came over 3 days a week for the first 2 months. She has 2 kids of her own, and she helped me learn the rhythms of a newborn without making me feel like I was being taught. My mother flew in for 3 weeks and cooked and cleaned and said almost nothing about Marcus, which was the greatest gift she could have given me. She just held the baby when I needed to sleep and left the analysis for later. I returned to work remotely at 10 weeks because the focus helped me more than the absence of it. My colleagues knew the broad strokes, that my marriage had ended, and there was some legal complexity, and they were professionally kind in the way that good workplace people are, giving me space without withdrawal. I was building a life from the parts that were actually mine, slowly, without drama. Marcus's criminal case resolved about 11 months after Nora was born. He pleaded guilty to 2 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of contractor fraud in exchange for avoiding the federal charges going to full trial. He received 30 months probation, a $175,000 restitution order, and the permanent revocation of his contractor's license in the state. Trevor pleaded guilty to 1 count of conspiracy and received a fine and 18 months probation. The construction company effectively was finished. The license was gone. The reputation was gone. Most of the hidden equity had to go toward restitution and legal fees. What remained was a fraction of what it had been. Marcus's attorney told Patricia that Marcus had expressed genuine remorse and hoped this information would be considered in the divorce proceedings. Patricia told me about this with a very neutral expression. I said, "Is expressed genuine remorse a legal term?" She smiled and said not in any jurisdiction she was aware of. The divorce was finalized 4 months after that. Nora was 15 months old. I kept the house. I had been the one managing the mortgage. It was in both names, but the payment history was essentially mine. Marcus received a negotiated settlement from what remained of the marital estate after restitution. It was not large. Patricia called it appropriate under the circumstances and left it at that. About 3 months after the divorce was final, I received a letter, not from Marcus, from Corrine. It was handwritten, 2 pages, and she had clearly rewritten it several times based on the places where the pen pressure changed. She said she was sorry. She said she had convinced herself she was doing the right thing by telling Marcus what she had seen, that she had genuinely thought the meeting she witnessed was inappropriate, but that she had known about the financial situation, had known Trevor was involved in something wrong, and had hoped that creating doubt about me would give Marcus and Trevor time to clean things up before I figured it out. She said she hadn't known it would lead to what it led to. She said she understood if I never forgave her. I read the letter twice. I set it on my kitchen table. I made myself a cup of tea. I thought about Corrine, a woman I had never disliked, had genuinely considered a family member, had given birthday gifts to, and spent holidays with for 6 years. A woman who had looked at my 8 months pregnant body and made a calculated decision to use a lie to destabilize me and protect her husband's fraud. I didn't respond to the letter. I kept it for my records. Forgiveness is something I think about a great deal. I believe in it intellectually. I believe it is something people do for themselves and not for the people who hurt them. But I also believe there is a difference between forgiving something and pretending it was smaller than it was. I chose, very deliberately, not to pretend. There is a chapter of this story that I almost didn't include because it happened quietly and it doesn't have the kind of clear resolution that makes for a satisfying telling. But I think it's important. About 8 months after the divorce, Marcus asked through Patricia if he could have supervised visitation with Nora. He had been paying child support faithfully. It was structured through the court and automatically deducted, so there wasn't really an option to be inconsistent about and he was technically entitled to pursue a visitation arrangement. I did not fight it. I want to be very clear about that. Despite everything, I do not believe children are weapons. I do not believe that my pain should become Nora's loss. Marcus is her biological father, and whatever he did to me, he did not do to her. She deserves to know who he is and to form her own understanding in her own time. The supervised visitation started in a family center, 2 hours on Saturday mornings. From what the supervisor reported, Marcus was attentive and gentle with her. He brought books. He sat on the floor. He seemed like a man who understood he had lost something enormous and was not sure what to do with that understanding yet. I don't know what kind of father he will be. I don't know what he tells himself about how everything unraveled. What I know is that Nora will have access to truth when she's old enough to understand it, and I will not be the one to poison it for her in either direction. Here is what I know now that I didn't know before any of this started. I know that financial abuse does not always look like control. Sometimes it looks like delegation, like a partner saying, "You handle the money, you're the expert," when what they actually mean is, "You handle the visible money while I handle the rest." I know that loyalty can become a blindfold if you're not careful, that the more you invest in a version of someone, the harder it is to see when the version is lying to you. I know that silence is not the same as weakness. I was silent for 3 months while I built my case, and every person who saw me during that time assumed I was just a tired, pregnant woman doing her best. They weren't wrong about what they saw. They were just wrong about what was underneath it. I know that the DNA test, that specific humiliation, that particular cruelty delivered in the hour of my greatest vulnerability, was actually the thing that freed me, not because it was the worst thing Marcus did. The fraud was worse in measurable terms. But the DNA test was the moment I stopped protecting him from the consequences of himself. He looked at our newborn daughter and chose doubt. And in doing that, he removed the last reason I had to keep the peace. I know that quiet is powerful. That documents are powerful. That a woman who keeps receipts and keeps her composure and keeps building her case while everyone around her underestimates her is the most dangerous person in any room she enters. Nora is 2.5 now. She has 14 words that she uses constantly and about 40 that she knows but deploys selectively, which the pediatrician assures me is completely normal and which I privately believe is early evidence of excellent strategic judgment. I am still in the house. I've repainted the living room a color I always wanted and Marcus always vetoed. I have a garden now, which I started from seed in the spring after the divorce, and which produces more tomatoes than one person and one toddler can reasonably consume. I have given bags of tomatoes to my neighbor, and to Lena, and to the woman at my office who always looks like she could use something unexpectedly good happening to her. I went back to full-time work when Nora was 14 months old. I've been promoted once since then. I am good at my job in ways I was always good at my job, but now I am also good at it without the low-level anxiety of protecting a lie I didn't even know I was protecting. I am not bitter. I want to be precise about that. Bitterness is what happens when you let someone's wrongdoing define the story of your life. I refuse to let Marcus's choices be the most important thing about me. What I am, instead, is clear. Clear about what I will accept and what I will not. Clear about the kind of person I want to be when things become genuinely hard. Clear about the difference between staying, because you love someone, and staying, because you are afraid of what you will find if you look clearly. I looked clearly, and now I know exactly where I am. That is not a small thing. People ask me sometimes, usually after I've shared pieces of this story with someone who needed to hear it, what I would say to the version of myself sitting in that hospital bed, holding Nora for the first time, while my husband asked for a DNA test. I would say, you are not wrong about what this means. You are not dramatic. You are not overreacting. The feeling in your chest right now, that cold, clarifying break, is not a wound. It is a door. Walk through it. You have everything you need. You are better with numbers than anyone who has ever doubted you. You have a best friend who will show up with food and ask the right questions. You have a lawyer waiting. You have a forensic accountant who is already impressed. You have 3 months of evidence in a cloud folder under an email address no one knows. And you have a daughter who is 2 hours old and already looking at the world with T. Hat serious, measuring expression that is going to take her very far. You are going to be okay, not in spite of what is coming, because of how you handle what is coming. Walk through the door. If this story stayed with you, if some part of it felt uncomfortably familiar or deeply satisfying or both at the same time, I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments. What was the moment you felt the shift? Was it the DNA test, the bank alert, the letter from Karine? Or was it something quieter, the part where she just said okay and started building? Because I think the viewers of this channel know that the most powerful moment in any betrayal story is never the explosion. It's the silence just before someone decides to stop protecting the person who never protected them. Drop your moment below. And if you haven't subscribed yet, you know what to do. There's another story on this channel that will make this one feel like a warm-up.